Welcome to Off Balance, the podcast where faith, family, and business collide. I'm Dr. Brooks, a certified master life coach, transformational speaker, and author. Join me as we explore the journey of overcoming adversity and developing resilience. It's time for you to find your strength and reclaim balance. This is Off Balance.
Welcome to Off Balance, the podcast where faith, family, and business collide, and we get real about navigating it all with grace and grit. I'm your host, Dr. Brooks. In today's episode, we're exploring the concept of reasonable accommodations within the federal government, what it means, how it works, and its significance for employees with disabilities. So, whether you're a federal employee, an employer, or simply someone interested in workplace inclusiveness, this episode is for you. As many of you know, the federal government is currently on a hiring freeze. Reductions in forces have been paused. And so, more than likely, by the end of July, beginning of August, federal agencies will begin recruiting again. And a lot of people may be turned off, with going to work for the government, and that's fine. But I just want you to know that if you do decide to go work for the government, that if you have a disability and you want to interview or whatever the case is, or you have been hesitant to apply, you can request reasonable accommodations. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define reasonable accommodations. So let's begin by understanding what reasonable accommodation actually is. So according to the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, you may hear people refer to it as OPM. A reasonable accommodation is any change to the job, work environment, or the way things are typically done that enables a person with a disability to apply for a job, perform job duties, or enjoy equal access to workplace benefits. The EEOC guidance goes further, breaking accommodations into three main categories. So, category one, changes to the application process. Category two, changes to the work environment or job performance. And category three, changes that enable equal access to workplace benefits and privileges. So, reasonable accommodations is not about giving someone an advantage it's more about leveling the playing field. So I used to do labor management, employee relations within the HR field. I did it, for a year or two, and this was one of the areas that most employers did not understand. The latter years of my HR has been more so in staff and recruitment and placement. And it's just mind-boggling how many people do not request accommodations. I can say maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, we may have received 1 or 2 requests for accommodations, which is interesting because I know that there are more people out there with disabilities, but I feel like maybe they don't know that they can request accommodations even for the interview process. So if you look on USA Jobs and you go down to the additional information section, most agencies have a link to where you can request reasonable accommodations. Or you can email that staffing specialist that, is the contact on that announcement and just ask them about it. And they'll just send you the link so that you can request accommodations. And so what is the legal framework? The legal foundation for reasonable accommodations come from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disability Act, which we know as the ADA. And so these laws, they basically require federal agencies and private employers to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals with disabilities, unless doing so would cause an undue hardship. So it's important to note that in 2008, the ADA Amendment Act, it's the ADAAA. I know that's a lot. That's a tongue twister. It expanded the definition of a disability. And what it did was it made it easier for individuals to qualify for protection. And this is so important. It is so important that the act made it easier for individuals to qualify for protection. So I'm going to give you examples of a reasonable accommodation. So basically, what does a reasonable accommodation look like? So here are a few real world examples. It can look like a modified work schedule for medical appointments or symptom management. It can look like telework options when commuting is a barrier. It can look like technology, like screen readers or voice recognition software. It could look like physical workspace adjustments, such as ramps or those ergonomic furniture. It can look like sign language interpreters for meetings and training. Each accommodation is unique because your needs are unique. It's about tailoring support so someone can do their best work. And so now I'm going to give you clarification. Who is the accommodation for? It's really important to point that um, sometimes can be misunderstood. So, reasonable accommodations is provided specifically for the employee or applicant with a disability, not for family members. Let me repeat that. Reasonable accommodation is provided specifically for the employee or applicant with a disability and not for family members, not for their family members. I know right now the return to work order is allowing for agencies to grant what we call compelling needs. And I know the compelling needs under reasonable accommodation are allowing people to, submit paperwork to show that they're taking care of a parent or taking care of, a child or anything like that that prevents them from relocating for the position. I'm not talking about that. That is something completely different. I am talking about traditional reasonable accommodation. So I don't want you to get confused because you may say, well, my agency is doing compelling needs. Yeah, that's just something that they're doing right now because of the return to work order. So that's something completely different. I may do I may do an episode about that. I'll just see how this episode does. And so it's for the employee or applicant, not their family members. Now, it is possible for someone else, like a spouse or healthcare provider, to initiate a request for accommodations on the employee's behalf, especially in emergencies, but that accommodation must be for the employee's own medical condition. This distinction matters, especially in the off balance world where caregiving is such a big part of life. The ADA and the Rehabilitation Act are there to protect individuals with disabilities in their own professional capacity, which will enable them to be able to do their job effectively. So, how do you request a reasonable accommodation? So, if you are a federal employee or an applicant who needs accommodation, here's how you're going to navigate it. The first thing you're going to do is make the request. You can request accommodation verbally or in writing. There's no magic words needed. Just explain your need. The second thing is you're going to engage in the interactive process. Employers are required to work with you to identify a reasonable solution. The third thing is you're going to have to provide documentation. If your disability or need for accommodation isn't obvious, your employer, they have the right to ask for medical documentation. They will still have to, protect your privacy. The medical documentation will only be viewed on a need to know. So you don't have to worry about everybody having access to it. It's interesting to me because as an HR professional, people are so afraid to share information. And I'll let them know, hey, the only people that are going to see this information, depending on what it is, I'll let them know would be myself and then the person that has to process the request. And then it immediately is gone away, right? So some documentation, if you're an employee, is filed in your records, but other documentation is just used for the coding of the personnel action. And so a lot of times people are just so afraid because they don't want everyone to know what's going on. And so again, the information is only disclosed as a need to know. So it's not like you submit your information and it's plastered on a bulletin board. That's not how it works. HR professionals across the government are very professional. They're very discreet. We're tactful people. We understand the importance of privacy. So I can assure you that your information is not just being neglected or just left on a printer somewhere. That is not how HR professionals operate. I do know that in the past there may have been issues within, offices or locations, but the greater of the HR professionals do a great job with making sure that they keep information private. So, what are some common misconceptions and practical clarifications? So, we're going to go deeper into some practical takeaways and some of the common misconceptions. Requests can be informal. No special form is required. Even a conversation can trigger the process. Employers must engage in dialogue. They can't just say no. They have to consider the request seriously. The accommodation must be effective, not perfect. Employers can offer alternatives as long as they work. Some things are off limits. Employers are not required to provide personal items like glasses or wheelchairs. Leave can be a reasonable accommodation. Even beyond FMLA, if the disability related and doesn't cause undue hardship. So if it's disability related and doesn't cause undue hardship, then leave can be a reasonable accommodation. Reassignment is often the last resort. If no accommodation helps and employee in their current role, reassignment must be considered, right? So they must consider reassigning you um, to a different position that can accommodate you. These points are not just legal guidelines, they're reflections of how we value people in the workplace. I want everyone to feel valued in the workplace. So your disability should not devalue you, and your disability should not make you feel like, people don't appreciate you. So I just want to encourage you that if you have a disability, apply for jobs. Don't let that stop you. If you currently work for an employer, and you didn't know about reasonable accommodations, talk to your supervisor about it. Resources for support. So navigating accommodations can feel overwhelming. So here are some go-to resources. Job Accommodation Network. They're known as JAN, JAN. So that's the Job Accommodation Network. The next one is Computer Electronic Accommodations Program, known as CAP. And then, of course, we have Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. These organizations offer free support, tools, and guidance to make the process easier for both employees and managers. And so I just really wanted to do this episode to kind of help with the barrier of applying for positions as well as being accommodated if you are a current federal employee. Reasonable accommodations is about more than compliance. It's about dignity, equity, and ensuring every person can bring their full self to work. So if you need that desk that allows you to stand while you work, request it. Request that desk that goes up and down, right? If you need the keyboard and the mouse pad that help with your carpal tunnel, request it. Request the things that you need that is going to help you to be able to work better. If you need to telework, or if you need to, whatever it is, as long as it's something that it's something that is reasonable to help you better do your job, request it. Don't be afraid to ask. Just ask, right? Just ask. In the intersection of faith, family, and business, we believe in showing up with compassion and clarity. And understanding workplace rights like reasonable accommodation is one more way to live that out. So I just want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Off Balance. If you found this helpful, I want you to share it with someone who might benefit. And always stay grounded in faith, present with your family, and confident in your purpose. Until next time, be well and stay balanced.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to rate this episode and share it with your family and friends. To learn more about your host, visit brooksdenny.com. Until next time, be resilient.